just going to start my timer here. I'm supposed to have like 20 minutes, right? Okay. All right. Okay, as Sister Penny mentioned, this is, I don't know if we call it a continuation there, but it is related very much to the subject we had in January, which was Catholic marriage. And really, if we wanted to put things in order, we probably should have had this presentation first and then the one on annulment. But for those of you that were here last time, I think Deacon Ovi did a good job of explaining the very basics of what he needed to do about the idea of marriage before he talked about annulment. But just for my own information, can I see a hands on who was here in January? Oh, quite a few. Okay, great, great. Well, if you do have more questions at the end, I'm not going to talk specifically about annulments, although I don't even think I'm going to mention it. But if you have questions about that, or certainly questions about the topic for tonight, we can ask them as we go along, or at the end. Hopefully I'll have a few minutes for that. And, oh, here it is, looking for the way to change the slide. So, the topic is Catholic marriage, but I think when we think about that topic, we might think about Catholic marriage as really being perhaps a shorthand for what the topic really is. Can everybody see this, by the way? Because this is the color scheme that'll be throughout here. We can dim the lights, I guess, if we need to. We're okay? All right. So, because there really isn't any such thing quite as Catholic marriage that I know of anyway. That's not a term that's normally used. But what I'd like to talk about for a moment is marriage according to the teaching and the law of the Catholic Church. So just to clarify that a bit. So why are we discussing Catholic marriage? Well, I'm not sure what your reasons are, but as I sort of meditated and prepared over this presentation, there's a couple of things that came to my mind. And these are two of them that were new to me because I often think about this. But it is that marriage is vital to the survival of humanity. Now that sounds maybe obvious because, right, we have to have children, but it's not so obvious to much of the world. Many people in this world today don't believe that marriage is necessary at all, because there are alternate ways of having children, of course, but also that marriage is essential to God's plan of salvation. And in one sense, it is a very primary way, or the primary way of salvation, because we bring new life into this world, and how can there be salvation without new people coming to faith and coming to belief in Christ? So, we need to understand Catholic marriage in order to become marriage evangelists. I don't know about you, but that's what I consider myself, is a marriage. If anybody wanted to put a title onto me, that would be the one that I would most relate to. Because I think we really need to promote the idea of marriage in our society, all over our society. And then this last one here, second one here, is very important too, to advise those in troubled or irregular marriages, particularly our Cursillo candidates. You know, when we bring candidates to the weekend and there's a marriage issue, someone in a regular marriage, it shouldn't be the first call to Father Arang, can you talk to this person? No. We should begin to understand our candidates and say, well, sister, you know, I know some resources that could help with your situation to perhaps get your marriage blessed in the church or whatever it may be. So maybe if we're a little bit more familiar with both the teaching of the church on marriage and annulment, we might be able to do a better job. And the other thing is, when someone comes to us to be on a Cursillo weekend, and maybe they're not ready for the weekend at this point because of some issue like that, well, we shouldn't say, come back and see me when you're ready for the weekend, right? We should walk with the sister or brother to try and help them to prepare perhaps to be ready for a Cursillo weekend. And if maybe they'll never be ready for that, but maybe we can help them out to be more faithful Catholics, to be more faithful Christians. So, what is marriage? Let me just give you some ideas. This isn't what the church teaches necessarily about marriage, but looking at marriage from a couple of different ways. The social phenomenon. There's a lot of things we could say about that, and in the social phenomenon there are actually some alternate types of marriage that have been with us throughout much of our history, actually. Polygamy is one man with multiple women or multiple wives. Polyandry, which still exists today and has existed at various times in the world is one woman with multiple husbands. And interesting, I don't want to diverge too much, but some of the reading I read on this is one of the most common occurrences of this were when a woman would marry a family, and it would be all of the husbands would be brothers, essentially. And so that was not too uncommon of a practice, but it wasn't really common. Polygamy is much more common and was much more common. And then, of course, monogamy, which is one woman and one man. By the way, throughout history, monogamy has been primarily the relationship of marriage, even in societies where there was polygamy, and I'm not sure if I always pronounce this right, polyandry. And then, of course, what is marriage? There's a religious practice, and not just in the Christian religion, but in many religions there is a recognition of the importance of a man and a woman coming together, and it's all, for the most part, always because it recognizes that need to bring new life into the world. Of course, we understand marriage to be, as Catholics, we understand marriage to be a sacrament. And I should really say as Christians, although many Christians don't realize that, even those who are actually in sacramental marriages, and you'll see why I said that in a moment. And then, of course, very important, we recognize marriage as a vocation. And this is particularly recognized today in the church, although it may have not been so much recognized through all of church history. Okay, in the early church, there is a whole history of how the church has viewed marriage, and I would say that we're very blessed today because the theology of the sacrament, the theology of marriage, has really blossomed in the most recent years, particularly with things like the theology of the body, which was written by soon-to-be Saint, Blessed John Paul II. And so many things we've come a long ways in studying marriage. For instance, if you want to learn about marriage, don't read St. Augustine. Okay, I'll just tell you that right now. If you want to learn almost anything else about the church, read St. Augustine. But if you want to learn about marriage, you know, I would recommend staying away from St. Augustine. I don't have time to go into all those details right now, but if you want to talk to me afterwards, I'll be happy to discuss it. So, what is marriage? There's a couple of ways of looking at this too. If we look at it from the basis of law, if you will, there's a natural law. And interestingly enough, natural law very much supports what the church teaches about marriage and what primarily has been the understanding of marriage throughout history. Because natural law talks about what's called pair bonding. That word is borrowed from a book actually by I forgot his last name. He wrote a book called The Naked Ape way back when I was young about the notion that we understand that a man and a woman are brought together on a biological sense in the way that a human being is designed, totally biological, no spiritual aspect of this, that we are brought together to raise children. And that's part of the reason it takes so long to raise children. I mean, it doesn't take very long to raise other animals, if you will, but for human beings, it takes a long time. Civil law, it is a contract. And of course, there are good reasons why we have those contracts. Again, they were primarily to support the idea of marriage as being good for the state or good for the society. And then church has canon law, which considers marriage to be a covenant. A contract, but a little bit more than just a contract. So, let's just read the definition of marriage that comes to us from the Catechism of the Catholic Church in the glossary. It says, marriage is a covenant or partnership of life between a man and a woman which is ordered to the well-being of the spouses and to the procreation and upbringing of children. When validly contracted between two baptized people, marriage is a sacrament. So, of course, the church focuses on these purposes of marriage, which is to unite the husband and wife for their own benefit. And then this other reason, which, of course, is to bring new life into the world, new children, and to nurture those children. So, I'm moving through this pretty quickly because we have a lot of material to cover. So stop me if you have questions. I may not go into quite as much explanation as I would like to do if I had about 4 hours to do this. Okay. Character of marriage. There's three things I'd like to mention, and these are very much at the heart of the church teaching on marriage. Marriage is conjugal and procreative. So it is, of course, the obvious that a man and a woman physically come together in the sexual relationship. It is conjugal and it is procreative, because out of that relationship, of course, comes our cooperation with God's creation in bringing new life into the world. It is indissoluble. In other words, a marriage cannot end. Now, there's an exception to that, of course. You end the marriage at death. Okay, so it's insoluble for a lifetime, and then after one of the spouse's death, the marriage ends. And so that's what the church teaches about it. And then finally, it is unity. There is an amazing, miraculous thing that happens when a man and a woman come together in a marriage. The two become one in a very mysterious, spiritual way, in an obviously physical way, at least for times in a sense, but in a very profound spiritual way. So what makes a marriage valid? Now this I will digress on for just a moment. The church has these terminologies that are good for you to be familiar with, because they're used in all kinds of different ways. There are two things that the church speaks about when something is, if you will, right or correct. It is valid and it is licit, which means valid means that it does what it's supposed to do, essentially, and licit means it's actually legal. So those are the two things that are spoken of. And when we speak of sacraments, we speak typically of two things that are required, and that is form and matter. So there's a form in which the sacrament takes place, and there's a matter or a material that is required for the sacrament. And so for a marriage, and now there's a little bit of distinction here, because we're not talking about necessarily a sacramental marriage at this time. We're just talking about a marriage. For a marriage to be considered valid by the Catholic Church, it has to have these two things correct. Form, and that is the witnessing of the consent by an ordained cleric, that is with proper authority. So, for instance, I actually can't go to San Jose and be the witness to a marriage. I can, but I have to get permission to do it from, essentially from the bishop through the pastor of the church. Matter is the consent itself, but not just the consent, the people, okay? The man and the wife have to be there, and they have to give their consent that they are engaging in this covenant relationship. Okay, and I will mention that. I wasn't going to really mention, but I should probably mention just briefly what a covenant is. Most of you have probably heard me say this already on various Cursillo weekends, but the difference between a covenant and a contract is that a covenant has no provision to break it. It basically can't be broken. Every legal contract, normal legal contract you have, has provision to be broken as part of the contract. But marriage or covenant relationships do not have a provision to break the agreement. Just a note there, the ministers of a valid marriage in the Roman Rite Catholic Church is the couple. And I stress Roman Rite because that's actually not true in the Eastern Rite churches. It's actually the minister. But in the Roman Rite, it's the couple. Okay, so what makes marriage sacramental? You might recall from the definition of the catechism that I read there, the bottom line told us the marriage is validly contracted, so the form and the matter are the same that I mentioned, and then both the man and the woman are baptized. You notice, are baptized. It doesn't say they're Catholic. So if a man and a woman who are baptized Christians come to a Catholic church, because that's really part of the form, at least in this diocese, it has to be within the Catholic Church. There can be exceptions to that, so don't be too literal, take me too literally, but it has to have the right form and manner, so it's witnessed by the cleric, and of course the people come with giving that consent. Whether they're Catholic or not, the marriage would be a sacrament as long as they're Christian. Now, it's typically not going to happen unless one of them is Catholic. But even for the one who is not Catholic, the marriage is sacramental. Now, they may not believe that, but it still is the case. If their intent was to have the kind of marriage that the sacrament calls them to, then the marriage is still sacramental.
So, Deacon Steve?
Yes.
So it's not true that both man and woman are baptized, because it can be that one person in the in the relationship, maybe not a baptized Christian, it could be an atheist or a Muslim, for instance. But given that, will it still be sacramental?
No, it will be valid and listed, but not sacramental.
Even if it is officiated within the Catholic Church?
That's correct. It is not sacramental, it is only valid. And of course, just for everybody, because I know Deacon knows this, but just for everyone else's information, that is possible. You can marry someone who is not baptized, but it does require permission. And actually, it also requires permission to marry someone who is not Catholic, who is Christian but not Catholic. It's a little easier to get that permission, and it's fairly easy to get both of those permissions nowadays. But it is recommended that you marry a Catholic if you're Catholic. The Church still recommends that, and I highly recommend it. But
permission from
Question, Father.
Yeah.
Is, so when you, they should be both baptized before it becomes sacramental, right?
they both have to be baptized, yes.
So, but then if one is like other religion, like Buddhism or Muslim, then you need to get permission, right?
Well, there's two cases of permission. They're slightly different permissions, but if one is Muslim and one is Catholic, you have to get permission.
But because of that permission, if the other one then get baptized, still it will not be going to be sacramental.
No, it still won't be sacramental. However, if one of the people is not baptized and that person later on becomes baptized, the marriage is immediately sacramental.
Oh.
If it was valid in the first place. Okay, if it wasn't valid, then you have to have it convalidated.
But do you have to be Catholic, just like you said, two different religions, one Catholic and one Muslim, and they got married, and you consider that they're both baptized for different denominations, so it's considered sacramental? No.
Well, not a Muslim. A Muslim, just to clarify here, a Muslim, a believer of the religion Islam, is not Christian. That's not a Christian religion. They are not baptized Christians. So the only time a marriage is sacramental if it is between two baptized Christians. So, and just maybe to help a little bit with that, you know, the Catholic Church recognizes Christian baptism by any Christian faith. Now, you have to have, again, going back to the idea of form and matter, the form and matter has to be correct. But if you're a Baptist and you want to become a Catholic, we don't rebaptize you. We recognize that baptism as valid sacramental baptism. We probably better move on, and if you have more questions, hopefully we'll have a little time at the end. Maybe not. Okay. Sacramental marriage. Oops. So, everybody should be able to complete this. This is general, not just marriage. A sacrament is?
A visible symbol of God's love.
Okay, that's not the words I put, but it's correct. Yes. An outward sign, which sign, by the way, is what we're talking about with the form and the matter, instituted by Christ to give grace. Now, the Catechism says this about the sacrament: an efficacious, which means effective, sign of grace instituted by Christ and entrusted to the Church, by which divine life is dispensed to us through the work of the Holy Spirit. So the same thing, but said in slightly different words. And the reason I put that up there, I wanted to emphasize for a moment this notion of efficacious or effective, because there's this important sign of marriage that becomes effective in those who are married. And I would suggest to you that that is true to a certain level, whether the marriage is sacramental or not. And well, I want to say something, but if I say it now, I'll confuse you. But remind me at the end to say what wasn't on the slides, okay? So, what are the effects of marriage? It is a perpetual and exclusive bond. And in the sacrament, we have the grace to live out that perpetual and exclusive bond. Exclusive meaning, of course, just the one husband or one wife. The grace to perfect the love. It doesn't say we ever get to the point where that love is perfect. I like to look at the couples. There's a couple there, right? Deacon and Sister Cora. I thought they might look at each other at this point and say, "You're not perfect yet." And I suspect any